And now I would like to introduce our luncheon speaker. His name is Zaheen Hussain. He's a native of Bangladesh, and he comes to Pittsburgh by way of Connecticut. And he is now Millvale Sustainability Coordinator. And he works with New Sun Rising and the Eco District Collaborative, which he's going to tell you about today. He is a shared community resource, helping advance Millvale's district's goals in the areas of food, water, energy, mobility, air quality, and equity. Before that, he worked on sustainability initiatives as a project manager for GTech Strategies, which focused on energy efficiency, and also he led the Re-Energized Pittsburgh Coalition. In his free time, he likes to play sports on the PSL team, and I have to confess, I don't know what that is, but it's called the Sneaky Snakes, and he's also on the board of directors for the Allegheny Watershed Alliance, Sustainable Pittsburgh, and Moose Moat Inc. So I give you Zaheen Hussain, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate the introduction. And I like to walk around when I talk, so if you guys don't mind, I'm just probably going to be dancing around a little bit. And can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you again for the introduction. Like I said, or like Sherene said, I'm Zaheen Hussain, Millvale Sustainability Coordinator, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about implementing sustainability planning processes within communities and how it's shaped up in Millvale, and some of the philosophy behind the work that we've been doing in town, not just in Millvale, but now working our way up the Allegheny River in Etna and Sharpsburg as well. A little context, Millvale is a borough, so it's a home rule municipality with its own mayor, police department, just across the river from the city of Pittsburgh. Folks are familiar with the Golden Triangle. We're about a 5-minute drive when there's no traffic from downtown Pittsburgh to the heart of Millvale. We have about 3,700 people today. At Millvale's population peak in the 1950 census, we had close to 10,000 people. So as industry abandoned the region, a lot of folks had to leave the community because they had to search for opportunities elsewhere. So a lot like the city of Pittsburgh itself, which lost about 60% of the population in that same period of time, Millvale lost about a similar proportion of its population. The community has tremendous challenges as a result. We have a 26.1% individual poverty rate. We have over a 45% youth poverty rate. And to add insult to injury, there's some environmental challenges that we've been dealing with as well. But historically, Millvale is about hard work and faith. And that's still in the heart and the fabric of the community today. This is actually one of the murals at the St. Nicholas Catholic Parish, which is the first Croatian Catholic parish in the United States and is located in Millvale and has some tremendous artwork if you guys ever get to visit. But with that hard work came resolve after the 2004 floods caused by the remnants of Hurricane Ivan, which produced actually the highest rainfall total ever recorded in Pittsburgh. And we actually just most recently had the second highest total ever recorded with the rains from the remnants of Tropical Storm Gordon about a month or so ago now. We flooded a couple more times in 2007, in fact. We had 200-year floods within a week of each other take place in 2007. So people are fed up with it, you know, and at a time when people could have abandoned the community and move on to somewhere else, which a lot of people did. There were folks within the community who really wanted to bootstrap it together and think about how to move towards the future. So they started to just do things, right? Someone was interested in starting a library because Millvale had never had a library before. Folks are starting community gardens, thinking about, okay, how do we bounce back from this? And that led to us eventually creating Millvale's first eco-district plan. Now, eco-districts is a planning process. It was developed out in Portland, Oregon, actually, within Portland State University's planning department. But then that spun off into its own organization that now consults sustainable economic development planning across the country and now even across the world in places like New Zealand and South Africa. The process was very accessible to the community. It really puts emphasis on 3 different things: climate resilience, well, climate change, resilience, and equity. So equity meaning fairness in development that happens within the community, making sure that it's by and for the folks that are there and to the benefit of the folks that are there. It's a cyclical process, so it has its imperatives, it has its priorities, but the most important thing is that every 2 years, we revisit the plan to see what kind of progress we're making on the goals that the community came up with together, and then refreshing the plan if needed, adding to it, subtracting, updating goals or updating projects if there's been movement within technology or overall changes. And that's really important to us because oftentimes what you have with plans is that, you make it, it's really big, bold, big picture ideas. It seems too big to do right now, so we put it in a filing cabinet, we forget about it. 40 years later, somebody opens it up, dusts it off, goes, oh yeah, we're supposed to do that. By making sure that our process is cyclical in that 2-year phase, we make sure that it's active and always changing as the community changes. The one thing that's constant in life across everywhere is change, right? Why should plans not also change with times? It's a flexible framework, so it's scalable to the size of your community and the needs of your community. There are different types of, we'll get to that in a little bit. It emphasizes collaborative formation. So how do you get the business sector, local government, community, nonprofits all working together to implement the plan? Millvale is a small community, right? And even aside from Millvale, I think across the country, there are resource constraints across several of those groups, whether it's the business community, the government, et cetera, et cetera. How do you make sure that everybody's working together and leveraging each other's resources in order to make sure that there is help when help is needed, and the organizations that are best suited to lead any one aspect of the plan is the one carrying that mantle? There are a range of eco-districts, so whether it's in Austin or Seattle or LA or Millvale, Pennsylvania, again, the plan is scalable and you're able to toy with it as needed in order to suit your community. So how did it work in Millvale? We really had 3 early phases, and it started with education, then onto engagement, and then onto planning. What was done previously, and not just in Millvale, but elsewhere as well, because people like to get into planning right away, people plan, right? They say, we are going to have a community meeting. It's going to be on a random Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. The same 5 people that ever show up to your meetings are the same 5 people that show up to this meeting. You check the box that you got the community's input, right? And that's not real community input. And oftentimes when you have outside expertise, kind of knowledge experts come in to distressed communities, you get communities who often say yes to things without necessarily fully understanding what they're saying yes to, only to have their community change in ways that they never expected, right? So Millvale actually, through a grant through the DEP, emphasized a year-long education program for elected officials, for interested community members, in order to create a shared vocabulary between the community and outside expertise, so that when planning conversations did start, there was a shared vocabulary that could be communicated through and create a plan that more strongly reflects what the community really needs. So engagement. This is really important in that, again, I mentioned that one-off community meeting where you check the box and you say, we got feedback. Well, again, it doesn't usually capture the full community, right? Folks might be busy. Folks might feel intimidated about going to a community meeting. Kids, we never ask kids what their opinions are about the community and then act surprised when they want to leave after they reach adulthood, right? How are they involved in the future of the community? So making sure that we're having multiple touch points was really important to us, whether it was block parties or activities through the library, just to gather input. One of the programs we ran a couple of years ago now was in partnership with CMU, where we actually every Saturday morning would bus kids from Millvale to CMU, and they participated in almost a camp where they learned the basics of planning and architecture. And then they came back and they, using software that they learned how to use at CMU, came up with design ideas for a key intersection in our community that we've been trying to plan around for a number of years now. So getting folks from across a range of populations within the community involved was really important. And then we got into planning, right? What are the community's hopes? What are their needs? What are their dreams? And how achievable are they? And how do we implement? Incremental implementation was really important to us in that, again, going back to what I said about the plan that goes into the filing cabinet and is forgotten about for the next 40 years, we looked at creating projects that started small, that people could get involved with, and then we started to work our way up to some of the bigger ideas like microgrid projects or more renewable energy installations. But really, it started with picking weeds and planting trees. And I just came up with that, and I'm really pumped about it because it rhymed. And really, tribe building. Tribe building is really important because you need to know who's going to be there for you when the work gets hard or when people move on. Again, communities change, people leave, people join. How do you make sure that capacity exists, not just within elected officials, but again, the business community, which is always shifting, and the community in general, so that as you have priorities that pop up, you're kind of finding the people who are passionate about those priorities and you're placing them in positions of leadership, even if it's not technically elected leadership within the community, and empower them in that way. So this is how it started. This is the Millvale Library before it even opened. This was before my time. I hear stories of when there was no heat in the building, but people get together just to kind of figure out, okay, what are we gonna do? And they started to build a vision for the community and a vision to address specific issues that the community was dealing with. So Millvale's first eco-district plan prioritized three things: food, water, and energy. Food, because Millvale is a food desert. There are no grocery stores in town. The closest grocery store is only a mile and a half away. But in a community where 20% of our population doesn't have access to a car, and the bus line that went to the grocery store is cut, people are often left to Sunoco and Family Dollar for their family's nutrition. And nothing against those businesses, they're an asset to the community in a lot of ways, but you just don't get the kind of nutrition you need to promote good public health generationally through only those types of businesses existing. So long term, we're working towards attracting more fresh produce type businesses into the community. But in the short term, we're teaching people how to grow their own food, whether it's kids, adults, creating spaces for that. Water, obviously the issues around flooding, but also connectivity with our riverfront, which is a tremendous economic asset, but is cut off because of a highway that cuts through the community. So how do we reconnect the community to that asset? And again, talking about green infrastructure and reducing the negative impacts of stormwater, Millvale is 0.68 square miles in total size, which sounds crazy, but maybe not so much in Pennsylvania. 90 to 95% of the water that flows through Gertie's Run, which is the stream that causes flash flooding within the community, 90 to 95% of that water is from outside of Millvale. So a lot of our work is not only towards promoting green infrastructure and overall stormwater infrastructure within the community, but then also learning how to partner with communities upstream and motivate them to promote good policy and good infrastructure to retain stormwater on site there as well. And then energy. Energy can be a controversial topic, right? People are always talking about having a plan for energy for the 10 million good reasons why we should have a good energy plan. And obviously there are environmental benefits, right? I'm an environmental scientist by trade, so really passionate about reducing the carbon footprint of our community. But, you know, one of the biggest things for Millvale is resilience. What does it look like for key public buildings to be solar powered and running on its own grid so that if you have emergency situations like floods or any other natural disasters, whatever can take the grid down, for those buildings to still be able to run on energy that's produced on site and provide basic services like shelter during those times of high need. And right now we're working on projects that are creating microgrids within the community, but we had to start really small before we started to get there. So we started to do things, and it started to build support. And rooms that once upon a time looked like this started to look like this, where more and more people want to get involved and excited and wanting to do something. So 2 years later, through implementation, we added 3 more sections to our eco-district plan and went deeper in the original 3. So air quality, because air quality is still a major public health issue in Millvale. In the Pittsburgh area overall, we have some of the worst air quality in the country outside of California for a number of different reasons, including transportation, including industry, as well as topography. So how do we work to reduce the negative impacts of air quality? Mobility. We want Millvale to be a place where people of all abilities and all ages are able to move safely within the community, but then also access outside of the community. Something people don't often talk about in relation to mobility beyond safety is really around access to opportunity. Pittsburgh is booming right now. I've only lived in Pittsburgh for 6.5 years. And when you're a kid, you think places are always the same, things don't change. But then as you grow up, you start to see that things do change. But never in my life would I have thought that I would see neighborhoods change so rapidly in front of me year after year, where a neighborhood like East Liberty looks nothing like it used to when I first moved to Pittsburgh. But with that comes opportunity, right? There is job growth happening in retail, in healthcare, in tech, and we want people to be able to access those jobs. Right now, for Millvale, you can't cross the river, and I guess a map would be helpful, huh? You can't cross the river to the greater east end of Pittsburgh, where there is tremendous opportunity and employment with a bus if you don't have a car. There's a bridge, but again, you have to have a car. You have to be pretty mobile. You have to bus downtown and then back east in order to be able to access a lot of those opportunities. So a lot of our work is around also advocacy with our Port Authority to make sure that we're creating demand within our community for there to be more access with public transportation, and also better bike ped infrastructure so that if you are a cyclist, if you are a walker, you have safe path and passage to those neighborhoods that are right across the river. And then equity. So this is really connected to the point I was making about mobility. Equity really being fairness in development. How do we make sure that we're creating growth for individuals within the community while the community itself grows? Because oftentimes what you see in development is a community rapidly transform into something that folks who used to live there or work there can no longer afford to do, right? And again, that's tied to opportunity. Being 0.68 square miles, no matter what we do, we probably won't be able to find a job for every single person right there in town, right? So that means being more connected. It means providing education. We had something like a 20% non-attainment rate for high school diplomas in Millvale. So how does creating a space like a library where you have connection and connectivity and community create those kinds of opportunities, whether it's adult education programs, youth education programs, connection to the internet. I was listening a little bit earlier about broadband connection, right? In a community where 45% of our youth live under the poverty line, but go to school in a suburban school district in a community that's much better off, they're immediately at a disadvantage because you come home and in 2018, if you don't have internet, you can't do homework, right? So being that place in the community and providing that also contributes to the overall growth of the community in an equitable way. So we did some fun things. We got to go out to Portland, Oregon and go through an incubator. We learned best practice from eco districts around the country. And then we agreed to collaborate. So we have the president of the Development Corporation, the director of the library, the director of a local nonprofit, and our borough manager, and our council president couldn't make it, but we brought him anyway. All signed an agreement to collaborate with each other in order to implement our eco-district plan. And that led to formalization, that led to tool development, so that there could be more efficient communication between organizations. Because one thing that happens as your community grows and things get bigger and wilder and everybody gets busier is that a lot of the relationships that occurred naturally and a lot of the communication that occurred naturally starts to happen less and less often just by way of people being busier and having more things going on. So creating efficiencies in communication, creating tools for collaboration was a really important part of that formalization process. So this is what our plan looked like. Food with our vision, emphasizing production, processing, distribution. That's our community garden, number of initiatives, like cooking classes, in generational food insecure communities and generational food deserts. If you build it, they will not come. You have to actually teach people what to do with food that might be newly available within their community. If you gave me a butternut squash 5 years ago, I'd look at you and ask you if you want me to carve something out of it. So we need to be able to provide that kind of education for people. Summer food programs. Again, when kids aren't in school, they might not have access to fresh, healthy food. So our library provides lunch every day through the summer so that kids in town don't go hungry. And it's good for business because we actually have an agreement with the local businesses in town to buy food from them to make fun food for the kids that go to our library, because after about 5 days, our kids get sick of kind of that slimy bologna that you'd otherwise get with cheese, and white bread. That's a mobile farmers market that we now have in a place where we soon to have a more formal, regular farmers market. Water, so green infrastructure, creating bioswales, creating rain gardens, not just within the community, but again, using those as opportunities to show communities around us what's possible, and then encouraging them to do this kind of stuff as well. And they are. Much to their credit, our neighbors to the north have been implementing good policies and green infrastructure in order to reduce their contribution to the stormwater situation. Although we did have a flood for the first time in 11 years this year, so there is definitely more work to do. So, number of projects there. Stream cleanups. We have an issue with lead water in Pittsburgh. I don't know if you guys have heard that up here yet. So providing people information on how to reduce the impacts of lead, how to get water filters, where they can go to get pitchers, what processes are in place to replace lead lines if you can afford to do that, or what free programs might be out there if you fit the income guidelines. Energy. So this is, talking about solar. 10 years ago in Millvale, if you ask someone about solar energy, they'd tell you that you're crazy. It's always cloudy. It'll never work in Western Pennsylvania. But the fact of the matter is we get more sun than Germany does, and Germany has by far a much larger percentage of their electric grid powered by renewable energy and solar than we do. So if they can do it, so can we. The technology was invented in America, for God's sakes. But now with a lot of education programming, you now have educated conversations with people, or that same person might look at you and say, I can't afford it right now. That's still out of my reach. But as prices come down, as efficiency gets higher, that might be something I might be able to do 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you know what? Even though that person hasn't solarized, that's still a mature conversation you're having and is showing a key kind of change in the mindset of the community. Talking about job access, right? So going back to equity. We are now starting to run programming for youth education every time we have any built infrastructure projects so that we start to unlock those ideas in the kids' minds. This is the first time we did that, the Millvale Teen Solar Fellowship, where as we were solarizing our community center, which you can see that right there, we ran programming where the kids attended workshops that they were paid to attend, where they learn about how solar power works, the types of jobs that are in the industry, the type of education you need. It's not just all installation and engineering. You need business managers, you need marketing communications professionals, Those are things that people don't always think about or associate with the clean tech industry. And then they got to shadow the installers, which was really cool for them, and cool for me in that one of the installers that they actually had a conversation with was a former coal miner who lost his job and is now powering and running his family through money that he makes by becoming a solar installer, right? And in a community that has so much poverty, being able to unlock those doors for those kids means everything, not just to the people that implement these programs, but hopefully for them as well. Air quality. So again, air quality is invisible, right? For a lot of people, it's still a major health issue. The Pittsburgh region is in the 98th percentile in the country for cancer risk due to air pollution. But there are things people can do to not just be good advocates, but also take care of themselves, take control of their lifestyle in order to reduce those negative impacts. Through measurement, we've seen that small particle counts that can be read on one side of the county can also impact air quality in our part of town by, again, deploying monitors around town. We've also seen with data that the Pittsburgh region is a place where if you open your windows, your air quality actually gets worse, not better. So if you know when you're having high pollution events, and you can inform people around those events, you can tell them, hey, it might be time for you to close your windows if you want to reduce those negative impacts. Or maybe this isn't the morning that you want to go for a run. So things like that, as we again work towards electrification of the grid or the vehicle fleets, and overall reduction in carbon emissions in the region. And also getting kids involved in built infrastructure projects. Again, so this was our Teen Air Quality Fellowship, where our teens got to design and build a public air quality monitoring station that now the prototype of which sits in the backyard of the library. But we're gonna be finalizing the design and actually gonna be using these as bus stops, park benches, and connecting people to that data live so that it becomes something that they think about more as they kind of live their experience through our community. Mobility, better signage, better access, kind of hit these points earlier. I know that I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna speed it up and leave time for questions. Creating access to bikes and safe riding. We have a program where we work with the Millvale Police and give helmets to kids that don't have helmets in town. Bikes to kids that may not have bikes once a year through a program that we have. And then again, equity, hit a lot of those topics, and I'll leave time for questions. We've gotten a lot of recognition. We've won a couple of national awards, a couple of state awards, a couple of local awards. The recognition is nice, but we're about action. This is a picture from Millvale days where we have wrestling on the street. It's pretty great. But this picture, I love this picture because it's kind of a good metaphor for where we are, right? We've taken off. We're looking at the ground where our goal is. We're kind of adjusting our body as we need to in order to reach our goal, and making sure we're doing the best of our ability to get there. But things to think about. And I like that the previous conversation was about thinking globally and acting locally, and I swear I made this presentation before that. Lead with the issues that impact our communities, right? Nobody likes, well, most people don't like a hungry polar bear. But the thing that, that we lead with, if it's not something that people can connect with, if it's not something that impacts them, or if they don't see how that impacts them, they're never gonna act on it. So what are the forces that might be making that polar bear hungry that might contribute to hunger within the community, right? Jobs in emerging industries, or the jobs lack thereof from industries that have gone away. Doing something, right? Just start. People oftentimes sit around and go, oh my gosh, you have such a long way to go. I don't know what to do. The problems are so big. Start with something small. Pick up a weed, plant a tree, build some solar panels. Consider the true cost of business. One of the things we trip up on is that dynamic of, well, if you want a good environment, you're gonna have to sacrifice jobs. That's not true. There's a tremendous tremendous sleeping giant in Western Pennsylvania in the renewable industry, and the manufacturing opportunity that exists here that can really help us reach our goals and provide jobs in every single community where you put solar panels, whether it's installation, repair, overall public service, right? And we have to start talking about that. The technology is here, and you're going to hear from Henry later on about some of the work that he's doing, but it's here. People have suffered, right? Communities in Western Pennsylvania have been hit hard, but if you can show people that they can take the technical skills that they have with their hands and apply that to a new emerging industry, that can start to change the conversation here. The impacts of climate change, you have to start planning for what we don't know yet. One of the things that really emerged for us this year, you know that Pennsylvania is having the wettest year on record right now, right? It's been raining every day. We've had flooding this year. We've had landslides this year. As winters get warmer and there's less vegetation on the ground and trees have less capacity to drop water, it's been creating landslides like crazy. And that's something people weren't thinking about before. And we are in no way right now prepared to deal with the consequences of that. There's no insurance for people. We've had multiple people who've lost their homes in Millvale this year, and they're hung out to dry. And that's not fair. So we have to encourage proper planning, not just at the local level, but at the national level to create opportunities and avenues out of those kinds of problems for people that are going to be dealing with those issues that they've never had to deal with before. Talking about jobs. Can you imagine if Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s, late 19-teens, was talking about, you know, saving big horse and buggy, right? Like, I feel really bad for the guy that stuffed the chairs for stagecoaches, but you know, that had to go. You got to think about how that job can translate to the automobile industry. And in the same way, how do energy jobs that exist now translate to new energy jobs in the future? And we have to work on that. And don't forget, this is the United States of America. We talked about going to the moon, and we did it. There's no reason for us to give up. There's so much opportunity here. There's so much hope. And I think if we can all work together from our communities upwards in changing our economy, that opportunity is there. And I'll stop. That's my email. And I can take questions if you guys have any.
Yes, I better use this thing. Are you keeping track of demographic changes? Millvale is, I think I did some mental calculations, God help me. 0.68 square miles is about 450 acres for those of you who are in the country, you know.
Wow.
Are you looking at demographics and changes in demographics? Because one thing I've noticed over time in some areas, especially back east, is that when things change and communities improve, the people who were there before can't afford. And I think my friend called it gentrification, whatever, fancy name, whatever it is. Then they move out. Have you noticed any changes yet, or will you be looking for that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's like one of the biggest things that we are thinking about right now. So Millvale is about 92% white right now. So when you look at the community, oftentimes, you know, people relate some of our statistics to communities that are African American or other minority populations. But Millvale has had it rough, even though it doesn't look like, even though people don't kind of perceive those kinds of numbers of white folks in communities as communities that might be depressed. What you're talking about is a major issue in Pittsburgh and across cities, in cities across the country. America is reurbanizing, and it's reurbanizing fast because a lot of the incentives that existed for people to live in the suburbs are going away. And honestly, like, people are liking city living again for whatever reason. Millvale has had a tremendous influx of people from all around the country, and we've been tracking those numbers. We actually did an affordable housing study in partnership with a number of other neighborhoods within the Pittsburgh area, and are heavily thinking about how do you build more or create more opportunities for affordable housing or home purchasing access. We're looking at starting a community land trust where a nonprofit can essentially subsidize home purchasing prices down to create a market entry point for folks who might start to get pushed out. But yeah, demographic changes is something we look at. East Liberty, the neighborhood I mentioned, was a largely African-American community it doesn't look like it did 6 years ago. And it's a shame because you have people who walk down those streets and they say, I feel like a stranger in my own neighborhood. And that's a huge fear in Millvale as well. Lawrenceville, which is the neighborhood across the river, in 2012, if you made 80% of the area median income, you could afford to buy a house in Lawrenceville at about $100,000 or so. A lot of those houses right now, 6 years later, are selling for $400,000. And people will walk into Millvale and say, oh, Millvale is the next Lawrenceville. You better watch out and you better run if you say that to someone from Millvale because they're going to chase you down. No one wants to be Lawrenceville right now within Millvale. They want to be a stronger Millvale. So again, going back to how do you create educational opportunities, job opportunities, and at the same time knowing that the market is changing in cities across the country, prepare the housing market to be accessible for a lot of those folks.
And it's not about minorities, it's about working class people, regardless of race. Out in the country, what I found throughout this country is that when you have a lot of big developments go up, the taxes go up, and then the local people who've been there forever and ever and ever can't afford the taxes anymore, even though they bought their, they paid for the property. So yeah.
Hi, my question is, could you give any sage advice on how you went about engaging the public in participating in some of these programs and educational opportunities that you offered?
Yeah, well, again, having multiple methods, so not just the community meetings and the traditional ways of outreach, but also having block parties, going into churches, just going into every single place possible where folks are gathering. But one thing we did twice now in 1994 and then again just this past year, we ran a neighborhood census where we actually paid residents to go door to door, to sit in bars. One funny thing, Millvale, we actually leak a lot of dollars out because we don't have a lot of grocery stores or things within the community for people to spend money in. Alcohol is the one thing that stays within the community where people spend money. Yeah, so we ran a very lengthy, 50-question census because, no matter what, you're always going to have folks who are going to be hard to reach for whatever reason. So we wanted their feedback. So through those 50 questions, again, getting a read of what their hopes, needs, and dreams are in order to better plan for the next 20 years. And again, being really intentional about it.
Are you factoring in the future the potential of autonomous vehicles and now it's 8 different companies in Pittsburgh that are working on that to solve a lot of the access and job problems for Millvale and the other depressed communities?
Very much so. And I want to apologize for using the term depressed communities too. Millvale is not a depressed place. It's a very prideful place, and most communities are, and I think outsiders can point to them as being depressed. So I apologize for doing that, but I really appreciate the question. Not just access and affordability, but also parking. If there's one thing that people get really angry about, especially when you start creating signage for biking, is parking, right? And as Millvale grows, as we've gotten more and more businesses every year, breweries, concert venues, new bars, new restaurants, people say, well, I can't park in front of my own home anymore. And, the outsider's answer to that is, well, you live in an urban area, you better get used to walking. But that's unfair, right? That's not their community. Their community is changing. So there's a conversation around, do we build a parking garage? How much capital investment does it take to build a parking garage? How long will it take to pay off that parking garage? If autonomous vehicles exist before you pay that parking garage off, that's a bad investment, right? And that's bad investment of taxpayer dollars. One of the things we're thinking about is, okay, if 20 years from now, you're just going to get out of your car and your car is going to auto park itself down the block where there's a parking spot, well, all of a sudden, you're not having to deal with that issue yet, right? So it's a very tricky kind of conversation when it comes to that. But in regards to the access and jobs, Yeah, autonomous vehicles are a part of the conversation. I think we're all still trying to figure out what it actually means. And I think it's going to be something that forces its way into our communities, whether we ask for it or plan for it or not.
How do you find it, finding balance in a kind of traditional area in experimental, like, advocacy? You know, you're coming up with experimental ideas. Are you finding it hard to kind of get people to break out of the traditional ways from before?
No, because I think it's actually making it easier for people to access it. We're the ones that are having to think a little bit more creatively. So if it's a challenge for anyone, it's a challenge for us to work harder and think more creatively. But you know, again, if all you're doing is using social media, and you know that a lot of folks in your community don't have access to social media, then social media is not going to work. And I think the fallback in a lot of places right now is social media, if not door to door. So again, yeah, I think it's actually making it easier for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaheen. Wonderful presentation. We appreciate you being here very much.